Good morning, everybody, and greetings wherever you are in the world if it's not a morning. AGA Celebrity Interview today has two very exciting names. I am so honored and privileged to know them and have them here today. And we are excited to hear those two very old friends talking about each other, especially bringing Jim Shigley's career to our view, and we can learn from that, hopefully. Accredited Gemologists Association is dedicated to education, and this program is part of that. We love connecting with gemologists throughout the world, and we take pride in what we do in terms of education and promoting gemology all over the world. This program would not be possible without our sponsors, so I'd like to thank them as we're starting. Our sponsors are estatebuyers.com, Thermo Fisher Scientific, Gem Shopping Network, Stoller, Heritage Auctions, Scottish Gemological Association, Canadian Gemological Association, Magilabs, Quantum Leap Appraisal Software, and American Society of Appraisers. I would like to also remind you that 2024 will be AGA's 50th anniversary. We will start the big party and the kickoff at the Tucson conference, our annual conference in Tucson, and we love being there every year with our members and to be members. And this year is going to be a big party. So we have a wonderful program, really distinguished speakers, and we will have a birthday party at the gala with the Bonanno Award winner. So make sure that you spare a day in Tucson to join us on the January 31st. All the announcements are on our website. And we are looking forward to seeing you all there if you can make it. If you cannot make it to Tucson, it will be available digitally, so you can register for digital recordings as well. With that, I don't want to take too much of your time, and I want to start this wonderful conversation. But I'd like to say a few words before we do. First of all, as housekeeping, Kate Donovan, our executive director here, is going to take care of all the chat boxes, and she will be monitoring the questions and the chat box and posting a lot of information. So keep an eye on the chat box for sure. And obviously, we're open to any questions that you would like to ask. We encourage you to ask questions. Please feel free to type your questions in, and we will be able to ask both Donna and Jim regarding the questions as long as we have time. Otherwise, we can easily send the questions later on, and you get your answers later. Obviously, this program is open to everybody. It's not just a members only program, so you will be able to see the recordings later on Go to Stage platform. And I would like to say that I am privileged, honored, and really humbled in front of these two important names. I've always looked up to them when I was growing up in this business, and I've always been so touched by their very friendly and welcoming attitude since the moment we met. And they've never changed that. This is the beauty of our business. As once a good friend of ours, Sarah Steele, said, the rock stars of this business are very reachable. And Jim Shigley and Dona Dirlam are definitely not exceptions, and they're very generous with their knowledge and with their friendship. So I'd like to thank them in front of you, first of all. Second, they are so well decorated that they don't even talk about that. Jim's shaking his hands already. When I invited him for this program, he looked at me and said, "I'm not a gemologist, I'm not a celebrity. Why do you want me here?" Well, we're going to find out how a non-gemologist can be a celebrity in our business, thanks to Donna, first of all. And as gemologists, we owe you a lot, Jim. So yes, maybe you don't classify yourself as a gemologist, but you have done a lot for our industry, and the awards that you have are a testament to that. Again, obviously, we are, as AGA, honored to have you amongst our Bonanno Award winners, which you got in 2008. But on top of that, you have AGA's Lifetime Achievement Award in 2017, then Robert Shipley Award in 2021, and then GIA Lidicode Award in 2019. So not many people have this many awards. And this is not taken away from Dona, because Dona, being the incredible force for the GIA Library, and pushing all sorts of educational open to public and for GIA Library to a limit, to a point that there was no limit for her. So we have benefited from that as students, as educators, as gemologists. So that's a wonderful thing. And Dona has 2 Lifetime Achievement Awards too. One from AGA in 2015, and the other is from Women's Jewelers Association, WJA, in 2016. So we are truly honored. I don't want to talk any longer. I want to leave the platform to you, and we would like to watch and be a fly on the wall and see and hear what you have say to us. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to thank the Accredited Gemologists Association for this opportunity today. I've been with GIA for 41 years and a few months, and I am just so grateful for the many opportunities that GIA has given me. So I thought I would try to present a little bit of a recollection of my time here at GIA. I spoke to AGA, I think 3 years ago in the fall of 2020 about gemology as a science, and this is going to be kind of a little bit of a look back, but a continuation of that same idea. Next, please. Next slide. So, copyright. I think if you had walked in the door with me on the 1st of June in 1982, 41 years ago, you would recognize a lot of things that were similar, education and laboratory reports. But in terms of research, I think we have to kind of realize what the situation was in 1982. Very limited analytical instrumentation available, no computers, no cell phones, no email, paper documentation of any reports or data, no searchable information database, and no internet. It was a different world in so many ways. Next, please. Just kind of a quick comparison, our scanning electron microscope in 1982 and the one we have today. Next, please. So, gemological research today. Extensive use of analytical instrumentation. We have scientists and technicians. We have access to the scientific community. We have very extensive data collection analysis procedures. We've created a large information database. We're involved in conferences and frequent publication of our results. You see this picture here of me. This is kind of a staged picture because I didn't really know how to work these things. I thought, Donna, did you want to then start the questioning? Did you want to start the questions then?
Sure. Well, I think we can go right into your next image.
So one of the questions,
if you would tell us about how you got to GIA.
How I came to this organization, GIA. My father was in the military, and I grew up in a number of different places. But in 1967, I got accepted to UC Berkeley, and I wanted to study geology because it was science outdoors. Berkeley at that time was kind of a crazy place, but from a scientific point of view, from a geological point of view, at that time, the late 60s, the idea of plate tectonics was just becoming more and more accepted. The idea that we have new oceanic crust forming in the mid-ocean ridges, and it spreads out sideways. It carries along continents and is subducted. This idea has revolutionized geology at that time, and it explains all the topography that we see today. So I survived at Berkeley, and then I graduated in 1971. And because I was on a scholarship from the military, I then spent 5 years in the Army, and I had control of several tanks like the one you see in the upper right. I spent 3 years in Germany and 2 years in California. I was married in 1976. Go back one, please. But in 1976, after I got married, the Army was shrinking in size after the Vietnam War, and so promotion opportunities were a little bit going to be restricted. So I kind of, my wife and I decided maybe I should go back and try to be a graduate student. And so I kind of, on a lark, I applied to Stanford University and was accepted, although I'd done nothing in geology for the previous 5 years in the military. But I began my graduate student career for the next 6 years, and my wife went from a lieutenant's wife to a student's wife. But I had I survived Stanford, which was surprising to me, and I graduated in 1982 and began looking for a job. I wasn't figuring myself as a university professor, but having been a mineral collector, I was kind of more interested in perhaps working for a museum. But in January 1982, I was being interviewed at the LA County Natural History Museum, and I had a chance to come over to Santa Monica to visit GIA. At that point, I'd never heard of GIA before. I didn't know anything about it. But I was kind of impressed with the opportunity to look at gemstones. So I wrote to Mr. Litticoat and asked if they might be interested in hiring me. And somehow they decided they were. So I started again on the 1st of June, 1982. Next slide, please. So while at Stanford, I did my PhD thesis here in San Diego County in the town of Pala, which is about 25 miles northeast of Carlsbad, which from almost over a century has been kind of a famous source of gems. And the location I worked on was the Stewart pegmatite, which is just within sight of the town of Pala. It's that light-colored band of rock you see in the upper right photograph. The pegmatite is kind of a special coarse-grained granite that forms typically on kind of veins or fractures. So you see that outcrop, that's the edge of the pegmatite dike. And this pegmatite was mined from the late 1800s for lepidolite and gem tourmaline, such as the one there in the photograph. But in my thesis, I wasn't really looking at the gem minerals. I was looking at this black object on the lower right. This is a crystal of lithiophyllite, which is a lithium manganese phosphate. It kind of forms a solid solution with a trifolite, which is a lithium iron phosphate. There are about a dozen phosphate minerals that are formed as primary minerals in a granitic pegmatite. Apatite is probably the best known. So you have about a dozen primary minerals that form in the pegmatite as these crystals. And when this lithiophyllite is fresh, it kind of has a tan color. But in the pegmatite, after formation, this lithiophyllite begins to alter. And from about 12 primary minerals, you get more than between 200 and 300 secondary phosphate minerals. So when you cut these open, you see kind of a complex zoning pattern of the secondary minerals. So that was kind of my PhD thesis in Pala. Okay, Donna?
Yes, now we're interested in hearing something about synthetic diamonds.
Next slide, please. Well, when I joined GIA in 1982, we had examined the first General Electric synthetic diamonds. Bob Crowninshield, my colleague, wrote about them in Gems and Gemology in 1971. And then John Quabla and Chuck Fryer wrote about them again in 1984. But in 1986, my colleague, Carol Stockton, noticed an ad in some industrial materials publication for synthetic diamonds that one could purchase from this Japanese company, Sumitomo Electric Industries. These were actually the first commercially available synthetic diamonds that one could purchase. Sumitomo Company had a sales office in Long Beach. So I contacted them and talked to the manager and asked if we could buy some of these and produce an article that came out in the winter 1986 issue of G&G. And again, this was the first commercial synthetic diamonds that anyone had examined. But what was interesting to us is that a lot of the visual features they had were what Bob Crowninshield and John and Chuck had reported earlier in the General Electric's material, because they were grown by the same high pressure, high temperature technique. Well, this synthetic diamond article in 1986 kind of put our research program a lot more on the map. And that led to a number of interesting things. And so it came out in February 1987, the article, and I asked Mr. Liddicoat at the time if I might be able to send a copy of this article to De Beers, because I knew that De Beers had a research group and they had an annual invitation-only scientific conference. So Mr. Liddicoat gave me the name of a De Beers director he had met in Europe, and I mailed this individual a letter along with a copy of this issue, and I got a very nice response back. So thank you so much. I pass this on to my research colleagues. I didn't think more of it. Nice letter from De Beers, which was kind of special. Next slide, please. But later that spring of 1987, I was invited to speak at a jewelry trade conference in Europe. And there was a De Beers representative there named Roger Van Eegen. And he introduced himself to me and said, "Would you come up to London?" Well, I had to kind of check with my boss in Santa Monica, but I ended up going to London, and I had a tour of the Central Selling Organization office there on Charterhouse Street there in the upper left. And then later I had a opportunity to visit the De Beers research facility in Maidenhead outside of London. That summer, I was invited to the De Beers research conference, which was being held at Oxford. And I was horrified when I got the schedule of the conference, and I was listed as the distinguished lecturer. And I'd hardly ever spoken to anybody, but here I was going to Oxford University. Well, I survived that talk, but then I was surprised in, I think, August of '87 or September, that I got a letter from De Beers saying we'd never admitted this very much publicly, but we've been growing synthetic diamonds for a long time. And we'd like you at GI to examine some of them. And they sent this group of them, much larger than what we'd seen at Sumitomo, but again, the same features. And these two articles kind of set us on kind of the beginning of the means of identification of synthetic diamonds. And there have been many articles since that time. And I think it's the basis of the fact that these synthetic diamonds are identifiable. You know, they have a very short growth history to the millions of years of diamond formation on the Earth, which you cannot replicate in the laboratory. That's the basis of the identification. Donna.
And what I wanted to point out is the extensive writing that Jim and his colleagues have done in the literature over his career. Astonishing. It would take lifetimes of other people to accomplish what Jim has done. You can access all of those Gems and Gemology articles by going to the GIA website, to the research section, looking up G&G, and all of these articles are for free download. Let's move on to another fascinating area that you worked on, Jim, Brazil and Paraíba tourmalines.
Next slide.
Next slide, please.
In 1990, we first saw some of these amazing colored tourmalines from Paraíba State in Brazil. They came to us from a colored stone dealer in Eder Oberstein. We'd never seen tourmalines of this color. We were a little suspicious if they were real, but they were, and we produced an article at that time, really my colleague Emmanuel Fritsch and I, to kind of characterize these new tourmalines, and we found they contained copper as an important coloring agent. Was really the first time that had been recognized. And so we produced this article, which really was the first description of Paraíba tourmalines. I wish we'd have bought several of the crystals at that time, but we weren't that smart. I had a chance to go a few years later with Brendan Loris to Brazil. The lower picture on the left is the hill where the tourmaline, the pegmatite is located that was producing these spectacular tourmalines. So this is a pretty amazing discovery of these tourmalines, and you now, of course, know what these are selling for in the market. Okay, Donna.
Yes, and now we'll come back to diamonds and go to South Africa. I apologize for the delay, for the interruption. I'm in a room that's marked beauty parlor, and the lady wanted to know if I would be willing to cut her hair. So I apologize for that interruption. So we go to the next slide and see diamond mines in South Africa.
Well, based on that initial visit to De Beers in 1987, we began a relationship with the De Beers Research Group, trying to deal with the questions of diamond identification of both synthetic and treated diamonds. And we began an annual visit there to Maidenhead. And I must have been in Maidenhead 30 times over about roughly 20 years. But in about 1994, 95, I asked De Beers if I might be able to make a visit to the diamond mines in South Africa, being a geologist. So they arranged a pretty special trip for me for over about 3 weeks. I visited Kimberley, which is there on the top left, the big hole, which is the original pipe that was dug out by hand. I visited some of the major mines on the top right. I saw the mining ships that were docked in the harbor at Cape Town. And they also took me up to Namibia, where they're mining diamonds along the beach. Next slide. I also had a chance to go to the Cullinan mine, which of course is probably the most famous diamond mine in the world and the source of the famous Cullinan diamond you see. And what was so striking when I was in that open pit with the mine geologist, what was striking to me, I asked the question, do you ever see a diamond in the mine, in the kimberlite? He said, no. That was an astounding answer to me, that you would work all your life digging kimberlite, but actually never seeing the actual diamonds except at the very final stage of the recovery process when they're liberated from the kimberlite ore. That just kind of was a testimony to me that natural diamonds are rare if you never actually see them in the mine. It was astounding to me. I tried at that time to get the De Beers people to kind of work with us to produce some articles about diamond mining. But unfortunately, they felt that they knew exactly how to mine diamonds. And I tried to say, well, you know how to do it, but outside the fence of your perimeter, the knowledge about diamond mining falls off pretty quickly. But I never could quite convince them. But I do say in their defense, they came back to me a few years later and said, we should have done this with you, but we didn't. But I said, there's 3 or 4 articles, diamond mining on a pipe, diamond mining along the Orange River, diamond mining in Namibia and in the ocean. Just some fascinating stories that could have been told, but they felt not. Next slide. Then. I'd like to change now a little bit to colored diamonds. Colored diamonds have been always important in the marketplace. And, you know, I guess in the late 1980s and early 1990s, they were becoming much more important. And at the time, my colleague John King and his colleagues in our New York lab were working on some modifications to our cut grading system, our color grading system for colored diamonds. Of course, in this case, the color is assessed face up as opposed to face down on the D to Z scale. And because you have a 3-dimensional color space for colors, as opposed to a kind of a linear, more yellow, less yellow color space for D to Z scale, the challenge of describing the color is much greater. So I suggested that we might kind of try to take our fancy grade color terms and kind of map them to a Munsell space of color chips, because the color chips each have a kind of a letter designation on them and they don't get misplaced in the book. So over time, we worked on mapping our color description terms, the fancy grade terms, to a Munsell color space. And we produced an article in 1994 that describes this color grading system. It's kind of represented by this little schematic. You know, the colors, you can think of the colors as a hue term going around the hue circle, a lightness or darkness term, and then a higher or lower saturation term. And the lightness, darkness, and saturation components are kind of combined in what we call a fancy grade. So with this article, we kind of expanded our fancy grade terms with a couple of additional color grades. But we also began applying this expanded grading terminology to all the hues of the color circle. Prior to that, they were mainly used for yellow diamonds, but if you had a blue diamond, it was a blue diamond, irregardless of the strength of the color. I think this was a huge step forward for the colored diamond trade. We had to be a little careful in this new system that the Hope diamond, which you see on the upper right, didn't change its color description in the new system. It did not. But I think this has been a huge step forward. And this article really was kind of the first of a number of articles, which I listed here at the bottom of the slide, that appeared at G&J, where we've talked on several occasions about the great deal of information we know today about color diamonds, origin of color, identification, and so on. But I think this expanded fancy grade terminology has been a huge boost to the color diamond industry. Okay, Donna.
And it was great to have Ellis Geller be the person who brought us in to the new format of Gems in Gemology. Jim and I got to work closely as part of our editorial team throughout the many years we were working together. So thanks to Jim. He's also on the editorial review board back then and now. Shall we go on to cut grading, Jim?
Yeah. Next slide. Well, in about 1995, we began a what ended up being about a 10-year effort to develop the basis of a cut grading system for round brilliant diamonds. We began with a theoretical model of light interaction with a three-dimensional polished diamond. And then we used that model to try to fabricate actual diamonds with different proportions and kind of to see what their appearance would be. Prior to that time, round brilliant diamonds were there was kind of what was called the Tokowski ideal proportions. And those diamonds did look good, but if you didn't have those proportions, I think they tended to have less value in the trade, even though I think diamond manufacturers knew that there were other proportions that could yield a good looking diamond. So we began with a computer model and fabricated diamonds according to what we thought might produce a good looking diamond and a less good looking diamond. And then we had those test diamonds looked at by a large number of our observers independently. And we found that our observers were kind of ranking them in appearance in a different way than we were by our model. So we then needed to go back and kind of tweak our model. And we eventually, so some trial and error, eventually got the model to produce diamonds, and we would produce them with an appearance that the human eye would agree with. So we went on, we started with brightness, and then we produced an article about fire or dispersion and then scintillation. And in I think about 2000, I can't remember when it was exactly, I think about 2004, we produced the article that described this entire cut grading system. And we made a significant effort to kind of work with the trade. How many grades should we have? If we have these number of grades, can you work with that in terms of buying and selling diamonds? Do you see the diamonds the way that we do in terms of the appearance? We had a way you could kind of put in the proportions of your diamond into a little program on our database, and you would get kind of a provisional cut grade. We also wanted a grading system that could be appropriate for cutting around the world, not just here in the United States. Well, this was a huge 10-year effort. My part was small. I just had to go to our president, Bill Boyajian, very regularly and give him an update on where we stand. And hear why aren't we moving faster or whatever. But we did come out with a cut grading system. And it kind of includes the aspects of shown on the upper right-hand side. But I think this system also has been a huge step forward for the cutting industry, because we are saying there are proportions of diamonds that are larger when a cut stone than you would get by ideal proportions, but would still yield a good looking diamond. So what has happened over the last 15 years since this system was announced? We used to get diamonds for grading in the laboratory that might have a good color and clarity grade, but they didn't look very good. They're dull. Those are no longer in the system because we've kind of have a cut grade, and we've kind of taught people how to cut according to our standards. And I think it's raised everybody's cutting style and the quality of the diamond cutting. So this is a huge effort of which I played a small role as directing it in some way.
The other part that Jim does so beautifully, as you're hearing today, is he takes very difficult topics. We're going to move on to another one, HVHD, and explain that with the depth of science that we all need to have to understand it, but to also make it something we can communicate to our students, to the people, to our graduates in the trade. So shall we talk about HVHD and other color treatment of diamonds?
Yep. Next slide.
Next slide.
Well, in about 1999, we were shocked to learn that General Electric and some others have started to take diamonds and subject them to high pressure and high temperatures, such as in the press shown on the upper right, and remove brown color. And that they'd passed some of these diamonds through their lab and we didn't recognize them. And there was a big uproar in the trade. There was a lot of uproar at our symposium in 1999 on this subject. But the idea that you could change color in diamonds pretty dramatically. So this was a huge research effort to learn how to recognize these. And we know, of course, not more today. And it's a widely used technique and it produces some distinct color changes. Certain color changes are possible, others are not. But this was a huge challenge for us for a short time until we figured out what they were doing and how we could recognize them. 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 Why don't we just go to the next slide? Why don't we just go to the next slide? I did have a chance to go to a couple of additional diamond mines. And after the De Beers people had decided not to write some articles in the late 1990s, we began to get pink diamonds from the Argyle mine for grading. So I asked them, the Argyle people, if I could come out to Australia and make an article on the mine, and they allowed me to do that. And it came out in 2001. And what I was trying to do at that time was explain how one of these kimberlite occurrences is discovered, how it's evaluated for its diamond potential, how the permitting is done to allow the mine to be created. How do you build a city in the middle of nowhere and this massive amount of work to recover the diamonds? And this article appeared in 2001. And then just about 9 years ago now, I guess, I had a similar opportunity to go up to the diamond mine, Diavik mine in northern Canada, which is also was being operated by Rio Tinto, the same one who's owning the Argyle mine. And again, I did the same thing. How does one find this kimberlite pipe, which is a very small signature in the midst of thousands of square miles of tundra? How do you build a city in the middle of nowhere? In this case, you had to create, because the kimberlite pipes were underwater, under lakes, you had to kind of create a dam and pump out the water and then do the mining. I'd hoped to get back to the Argyle mine because it closed a few years ago, but I wasn't able to because I wanted to kind of chronicle how one puts the mine back to its kind of original state when you're decommissioning it. I thought that would have been a great story also to tell, but there are 2 articles about diamond mining, but it's very similar. I've been to mines in Russia and elsewhere. Very similar. It's a huge amount of work, but of course it's very productive. I think that's what's enough. I think we're just going to go on to the next slide.
And hear about beryllium diffusion color treatment of colored stones.
Perhaps you will remember this in the early 2000s. We found there was a new diffusion treatment. Diffusion treatment of corundum had been going on previously, but in this case, the diffusion was the element beryllium, which produces kind of an orangey color in a sapphire and can be used to treat rubies also. Well, the idea that beryllium at a few very low concentrations, a few tens of parts per million, was an effective coloring agent. And I think this discovery of this treatment was kind of accidental in Thailand, because I think somehow they had a piece of chrysoberyl put into the crucible along with the rough corundum. Chrysoberyl is a mineral that contains beryllium, and it melts at high temperature and releases the beryllium, and the beryllium colored the corundum. But when we realized that corundum at very small concentrations would produce color changes, we needed an analytical technique that we could use to do a quantitative analysis. So we invested in a laser ablation mass spectrometer, and I'm sure many of the other major labs have done the same. It allows you to do a quantitative analysis. You do spots, several of them, and you can see on the lower right, you're making a spot analysis along the girdle surface. You remove tiny particles in the material. Those are carried by means of a flowing gas into the unit on the left side of the picture, which is a mass spectrometer. And you can detect all the elements in the periodic table, the naturally occurring ones, down to low concentrations. This technique is the basis, this analytical technique for a lot of country of origin determinations based on trace element chemistry. But this beryllium diffusion was quite a surprise 20 years ago for us in other labs.
As we turn back to diamonds and looking at mining in Brazil, I want to remind us of the articles that Jim Shigley led us on. There were retrospectives of each decade, and if you go and look for those in G&G, you can see maps of the gem localities of the world and the exhaustive research he did with his team of us co-authors, putting together the bibliography to go with those mining locations. So could you tell us about your experiences in Brazil with diamond mining?
Next slide. I just first wanted to mention that we produced a special article on diamond geology. I and a colleague, Stephen Shirey, who's one of the world's leading diamond geologists at the Carnegie Institute. He kind of put my name on this article, but it's 99% him. But we tried to explain, how diamonds form in the earth and how they come up in these kimberlite eruptions, these explosive eruptions which have never been witnessed. And the kimberlite is really kind of just transporting. It's kind of like an elevator and bringing the diamonds up from great depths. And it just showed this photo on the bottom right. This is a kimberlite pipe exposed at the surface. I think this is up in northern Canada somewhere. But when the kimberlite gets to the surface, it weathers quite quickly. And so oftentimes the kimberlite pipe is in kind of a depression or under a lake because it doesn't have the resistance to weathering. So you see this kind of green outline of this kimberlite pipe that is exposed. Unfortunately, a lot of the kimberlite pipes don't contain diamonds, or at least economic concentrations of diamonds. Next slide. In 2014, I had a chance to go with my colleague, Robert Weldon, down to Brazil to look at diamond mining. I think we kind of forget that, the early sources of diamonds were India, but by the early 1700s, the Indian diamond mines were pretty exhausted. And diamonds were discovered in rivers by panning about that time in Brazil. And between about 1720 and 1870, when the diamond mines were found in South Africa, Brazil was the major source of diamonds in the world. So we had a chance to visit a couple of areas in Brazil where the diamonds are being mined still today. On the upper left is an exposure of a kimberlite pipe, which is kind of at the bottom of the depression, and it's kind of the greenish brown colored weathered kimberlite. And they pan that by washing, and then the heavy minerals sink to the bottom of the pan, and they flip the pan over, and you can see a couple of examples of that in the foreground where you see the red and black colors. These are the garnets and heavy minerals that are indicated minerals of diamond. And they find several diamonds each time in panning this way. They also have some more mechanized washing. But what's surprising to me is that diamonds occur quite widely in Brazil, but in most cases, the original kimberlite pipes have never been discovered, which means they may have been all eroded away. And all you have is the diamonds today in the rivers. But Brazil was the major source, and we did produce an article about mining diamonds in Brazil based on this study, on this trip. It was written by a diamond geologist who we met there, and he accompanied us around, and it was just a terrific visit. slide. I just wanted to point out this special country of origin issue, which came out winter 2019. It was a detailed explanation of country of origin reporting for colored stones. Everything we do is explained in this special issue, how we look at rubies and emeralds and so on. But I just want to point out also that based on our current understanding, I don't envision a similar report service will ever be possible for determining the geographic origin of a diamond. And there are some very real specific reasons why that's the case. We do have a diamond origin report service, but although it's called that, it actually is more of a matching service. We look at the rough diamond that comes to us from a particular mine. We send it back, we document it, we send it back, it comes back to us as a cut stone. And in many cases, we're able to match the features of the cut stone and the features of the crystal. And so we can say this crystal and this cut stone match, and the crystal came from a particular mine. That's kind of a chain of custody kind of report service, whereas country of origin for colored stones is we have the colored stone and we have to kind of try to work our way back and give an expert opinion on its source. Okay, Donna?
Yes, and now turning to a favorite topic of us both, would you tell us about going to Tanzania and what project came out of that?
2008, there was an important discovery of some very high quality rubies and sapphires at a place called Winza in Tanzania. So I had a chance to go with my colleague Brendan Lars, and we also went with a local European gem dealer who was living there in Tanzania. I think one of these discoveries, when it happens, is this: someone is walking along through the backcountry on a trail and sees a crystal in the dirt. And when that happens, it tends to be a land rush of artisanal miners who are going to descend on this place and are digging up the ground. They can't go down very far with their hand tools, so it's just, you know, where the rock has been weathered. But if you go down, in this case, 10 or 15 feet, the rock gets quite a bit too hard and you can't go any further. But I was so, well, of course, it was a great trip to go, but I was so kind of touched by these artisanal miners and the fact that they work so hard to find gem material. And unfortunately, they are sometimes not treated very well by the people who come to buy the rough gems that they found. They are taken advantage of at the bottom of the jewelry trade. So I thought, coming back from this trip in 2008, that maybe we as an educational institute should try to provide some education for artisanal miners in Africa. Well, having an idea is one thing, but bringing it into reality is a different matter. So next slide. I eventually kind of got smart and I partnered with Donna and my friend Warbert Weldon, and we produced a kind of a basic gem guide for rough for artisanal miners in Africa. It's kind of a pocket-sized book. It's on waterproof paper and spiral bound. But we wanted to just provide some basic gem knowledge for artisanal miners of, well, the challenge for us is what to teach and how to teach it, because again, a lot of these people certainly don't speak English, or they may not be literate. So it's kind of trying to kind of talk about identity and value with few words. Now, we also provide a little booklet, and Robert Weldon, over the last several years, and the most recent trip to Zambia was this year, has been going out. We've been working with a non-governmental organization called PACT, because I wanted to give this booklet free to these artisanal miners. But I would say, next slide, this has been an amazing program for GIA in blessing the lives of people in Africa, including a lot of women, because this is kind of a part-time, full-time job. They're trying to supplement their income for their families, take better care of their kids, build a better house. So he's been there, and Robert has done 99% of the work and should be 99% of the credit to deliver this education in Africa. We translated the book in Swahili, but again, we wanted to provide some basic education. Next slide, please. And it's been a real life changer for these people. In many cases, we've gone back and he's talked to them. This booklet changed my life. We're trying to say, separate things and separate things that are better quality, larger size. Don't sell everything together, because these high color, large, clear crystals are going to be worth a lot more. Sell them separately. But this, some basic knowledge has changed people's lives over there in East Africa, and GIA is committed to continuing this effort. And we're now kind of trying to develop more of a artisanal diamond mining booklet, kind of along the same idea, to help with those miners who are trying to find diamonds in Central Africa, West Africa, South America, and elsewhere. I think we're about ready to finish up. Next slide, please.
One of the benefits of working with...
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Donna.
I just wanted to say one of the benefits of working with Pat is they know the community, the environment, and they also help us do testing. So we go in, do the teaching, but then they follow up with the testing to make sure that we can document that the changes we're talking about, like more of their children being able to go to school, are actually happening, that it's statistically verified. And if you look at the literature, ever since this started, now there are many, many groups approaching artisanal miners, women cooperatives. So thank you to Jim for the brainchild to do this and move it forward.
Next slide.
Next slide.
So just to kind of sum up, this is really the slide I used 3 years ago in my talk. We're going to continue to see new sources of natural gems, certainly a proliferation of synthetic and treated gems on the market. Although I don't think we're going to see new synthetics. I think all the minerals, gem minerals that can be grown in the laboratory have been grown already. And those that haven't, such as topaz, there's no economic reason to grow those outside of our industry. But I think you're going to continue to see improvements in treatment and synthesis methods. Obviously, there's a significant price difference between gems of these categories. So you're going to have a continued reliance on identification reports, the growing use of scientific instrumentation. And of course, you have a lot of information of varying quality on the internet and social media. So next slide. So I just wanted to kind of thank you for this opportunity today. This is several of us in 1982, Bob Kane, Vince Manson, Carol Stockton, and this imposter on the right side. And then the research team today. We've come so far in us and other researchers in the gemological world of bringing research really to the center of gemology. And I think that is only going to continue, but I'd like to thank you for this opportunity and your attention today. And if you have any questions, I'd be glad to try to answer.
And I'd like to say one more word, which is to close my part with a quote from what Vice President of Research and Laboratory Tom Moses said when he gave in 2019 Jim Shigley the Richard T. Liticote Lifetime Achievement Award. Mr. Liticote deeply believed that GIA should have a strong research department. Thanks to Jim Shigley's work since the inception of his career, this vision is fulfilled. Dr. Jim Shigley's selfless sharing of knowledge leaves a lasting legacy, not only for GIA, but for the gem and jewelry industry globally. I know how much Jim's family means to him, and you can only imagine when you look at the hundreds of articles, the hundreds of lectures, the numbers of countries he's traveled, what it meant for him to leave his family to do all of that. We are so grateful to you, Jim, and I've shared your career since you gave that first lecture in 1982, and it's been my ultimate pleasure. Thank you, and thank you for letting me join you today.
Thank you, Donna.
Well, thank you. No wonder you have so many life achievement awards. You've done more than one life's work. And I don't know if it is just your love for gemology or the Army training, the discipline comes with it. Donna said what needed to be said anyway. It's just wonderful to see it all and hearing it from you was a great experience. It's such a great example for the newcomers, how important it is that we don't ignore science. We need to work with science, and we work hard. That's what we need in gemology, and thank you for that, Jim. I normally ask the question to anybody I know, like yourself, have been in this business for a long time, and clearly when we think about you, we think about gemology. When I think about John Koivulo, I think about gemology. But I'm always curious, if you didn't do gemology, what would you do? What else would you think, or what would you want to be if you weren't working in gemology research, or GIA wasn't an option at the time?
I don't know what I'd be doing.
I
I'd
kind
be
of
lost.
said, see, we love this, so that's what we feel ourselves.
No, I feel so fortunate here at GIA. I think GIA is the right organization or the right mission. I just have always felt it's important to kind of share knowledge with our various audiences, protect the public, ethics in the jewelry trade. I just think I'm just so grateful for our founders. And I'm trying to kind of at the moment create a little bit of a legacy video of our founders speaking on camera to kind of show to all our employees and anyone else around the world, so they get a little sense of, we were fortunate to work with them, Donna and I, but now of course they're gone, and I'm just trying to kind of preserve their legacy a little bit in words and seeing them on screen. So we're working on a legacy video.
Thank you, and we're grateful for that. Something that you didn't bring up, but it is very dear to my heart, that you and Donna worked so hard to bring a gemology session to GSA, Geological Geological Society of America's annual meetings, which has been going on over a century. And you made it possible gemology to be accepted as a session and deliver research papers. In the past, I can't remember how many years I've been there, at least twice. I'm really grateful for that. So would you like to say a few words about it?
As in most things, I follow Donna. Donna kind of pioneered this GSA involvement where we could have a booth and act like a university. But I guess it's been about 10 years or 11 years since we have been able to have a session at this meeting. It's the largest geoscience meeting in North America. Maybe it gets 6,000 or 7,000 attendees, many sessions on all aspects of geoscience. So we've had some great presentations over the 10 years. These are half-day sessions. But we also get so many young people who are in the geoscience education field coming up to our booth and asking, who are you guys? What do you do? I've never heard of you. That was the same question I had in 1982. But it's just been a real opportunity for us to kind of expose people to the opportunities that exist in the gemology world that they never would have considered on their own. So it's been a terrific opportunity to kind of have some closer interaction with the academic community. We've also been trying to provide some financial support to academic organizations. And of course, we've had some terrific people come to us as employees or our postdoc or intern program based on meeting us at the GSA meeting. So it's been great.
So you're basically showing that there's life after geological education, and it can be colorful and sparkling in gems, right?
Yeah, just show a picture of gemstones. That kind of piques people's interest pretty quickly, I've noticed.
Yep, thank you. Donna, do you have anything to say about these?
He said it beautifully. The other part is we haven't talked about the International Gemological Symposiums too much. We did in terms of some of the topics, but that's also been a great place where Jim has showed leadership in our research conference, our symposium, drawing together the scientists that he knows, our postdocs, to be able to participate in those. And I hope there'll be one in the future.
Thank you. We're actually over 1 minute our time, but we have a very interesting question here. I'd like to ask that before we close it, Jim, if that's okay. This is coming from Jan Zaib Qureshi, and he's asking, what was the most toughest findings in your career, sir? Something which has really challenged you?
The toughest project, is that what?
Toughest finding, or whatever challenged you most. I believe that's.
I think this cut grading system over 10 years, because initially, you know, there was a lot of, should we do this? Should we not do this? People in the trade wanted it, didn't want it. But we were trying to kind of create new knowledge out of nothing in a way, new knowledge about how to cut diamonds and how to look at them, how to describe appearance. So I think that's kind of the longest, most challenging problem in terms of kind of creating a new grading system when privacy didn't exist. So.
Thank you. That's a very good point. Creating a new system. Okay.
I'd like to give one more salute to Jim, and that is with the Googlen Colored Stone Project. There, over 2,500 gems are available for people to look at the data. We got the images that go with those. They're so well documented, and that's a database that he was responsible for pulling together too, with help, of course, but once again, Jim leading the forefront on it.
Yes, that I agree. I actually think Jim is a perfect database person creating all that, because you created those reference databases a few years ago, and I find them very helpful for teaching when I look for a particular subject, and I can actually go through those references on GIA website and look at all the publications related to that subject. That's an amazing resource for researchers too. So thank you for that, and thanks for bringing that up, Donna.
Sure.
Well, that's where we are. Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us, Jim, before we leave?
Well, that's the idea of this literature database. When I wrote that Sumitomo article and sent it to De Beers, I got a letter from one of their researchers who I'd never met, and he said, well, you're interested in seeing your article, but you know, some of this information you reported in the article has been reported in the scientific literature. And I was kind of embarrassed at that time in 1987 about that remark. So I just said, I'm going to do everything possible not to be accused of not knowing the literature. So I started building a literature database, which you referenced a moment ago, and it's kind of gone on. And at the moment, there's about 75,000 references in it. And, you know, I think it's probably kind of it takes a crazy person to do this, but I think it's pretty unique in the world, this kind of literature database on gem-related topics.
And we're grateful for that. Thank you. Donna, would you like to say something in the closing?
just that this has been an incredible opportunity to share this with you and the audience. Thank you to AGA for making that possible, and Jim for inviting me to participate.
Okay. Well, thank you all. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Dona. Thank you, the attendees. We had a great time and we learned so much. And thank you for sharing all your experience and knowledge with us in such a short period of time. If there are questions coming more, I will pass them on to you. This will be as a recording available to everybody on our website. You can find a link through our website. With that, I'd like to say goodbye to all and see you at our next event. And thank you again and have a wonderful day. Bye.